Hey, hello and welcome to Prime Code Media. In this video, I discuss the Bootstrap utilities. I'm only going to focus on 5 utilities, namely background, borders, display, sizing, and spacing. I'm going to use a div which has some lorem ipsum text inside, and this is the div that I'm going to use for this discussion. I've set the width of this div to 50% of my viewport, so this is the width that I have set for this div inside my style sheet. Now let's go check this div inside my browser and see how it looks. Here's how my div looks at the moment inside my browser. Now Bootstrap allows us to set the background of elements using classes, and these are some of the examples. As you can see at the top there's primary, the blue one, and the PG secondary, that's the gray one, and so on and so on. And then if you scroll down here, you'll see that there's the example code. So I'm going to use one of these Bootstrap classes to give my div a background color, and I'm going to go for this PG success as the background color for my div. So I'm going to do that inside here. I'm going to give my div a background color like so, PG success. Let's see how it looks. Refresh. Now here's how my div now looks with its PG success. That is the background color that I've given to this div. But now, as you can see, because of this background color, the text content is no longer clearly visible. So the documentation is very clear regarding this. Let's check what the documentation says. If you scroll up here, you will see that the documentation says background utilities do not set color. So in some cases you'll want to use the text color utilities to set the color of the text. So this is exactly what we are going to do, and the documentation has even gone further to even give us an example. Here's, for example, the class that they've given to this element here. So this is the same class that we are going to use in order to change the text color inside our element. So we are going to say text white. Now let's see how it looks. Refresh. Now here's how our text now looks. Now we've managed to change the color of our text using that class. Now next, we can also add the background gradient to our div. By adding a background gradient, we will be able to change how our div looks. For example, this is how our div looks without a gradient, and take a look at this PG success with a gradient. So as you can see, it looks a bit different. So this is exactly what we are going to do to our div. So I'm going to add a gradient to my div. So let's take a look at it without a gradient. So now I'm going to add gradient to it. So I'm going to do this inside here. So I'm going to say PG gradient. Now you'll see after refreshing this page, this background color will look a bit different. So let me refresh. Now as you can see, this background color looks a bit different, and this is because we have added a gradient, and we did this by adding that PG gradient class. Now Bootstrap also allows us to set the opacity the opacity of an element by using the opacity class. So for this, I'm just going to go to this page here on opacity. I just want to show you here the documentation also provides different examples. The documentation here, as you can see, it says the opacity property sets the opacity level for an element. The opacity level describes the transparency level, where 1 is not transparent at all, 5 is 50% visible, and 0 is completely transparent. And as you can see, you can set the opacity of an element using the opacity class, and the values 100%, 75%, and so on. So I'm just going to use 50% on my div, but for us to have a clear view of opacity, I'm just going to remove the gradient. I'm going to remove the gradient here, like so. So I am going to add 50% gradient, and this is an example of the class. So I'm going to say opacity. So this is the class, and then I'm going to specify the value, and the value will be 50% low. So let me also do that inside here. So the class is opacity, and the value for this one is 50. Now let's see how our div looks with a 50% opacity. Now this is how our div now looks. So it looks quite faint or dimmed with 50%. So I'm going to change this to 70%. I think it will look much better with 70%. So I'm just going to go back. Actually, I'm going to use 75%. I think 75% will be fine. So let me change this to 75. Now let's see how 75% opacity looks. Now, as you can see, it looks much better. We are able to have a better view of our text content at 75% opacity compared to 50% opacity. Next, I want us to move our attention to border utilities. Border utilities allow us to add or remove elements borders. Now, let's start with additive classes. Now, additive classes, we use them to add borders to custom elements. So here's an example code here. So to add a border around our element, I'll just use this class here. Let me go inside my code editor and add a border. So I'm just going to remove this opacity because the aim was just to show you how the background color looks with opacity. So I'm just going to remove it here. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to add a border to my div, like so. Now let's see how the div looks with a border around itself. Now here's how the border, the div looks. Now the border is not visible, and this is because the border is quite thin, but Bootstrap has a solution for that. So we can enlarge the width of this border. So this is an example of how we can. For example, we'll just specify and say the border and specify the width. So I'm going to put our width at 5. So let me go back to my code editor, and then I'll say border, and then I'll say 5. So this will be the size of our border. Let's see how it now looks. Refresh. Now our div has a larger border, so the border is much visible than it was earlier. So, and this is because we've changed its width using one of these classes. We also have the option to specify the site where we want to have a border. So that's, for example, if we don't want our div to have a border all around it, so maybe we want the border on the left or on the right, we can do that. And these are examples of the classes. So we will specify, we'll say border, and then we'll specify the size. This is top, and this is end. End is the on the right, and then bottom is at the bottom, and then start, this is on the left of the element. So for example, let's say in our case we want our element to only have a border at the top and at the bottom. So we can do that. Let's do that inside the code editor. Here I'm just going to say border top. This will give us a border at the top, and then I'll say border bottom. This will create a border at the bottom. Okay, now let's see how this div looks with a border at the top and the bottom. I'm going to refresh. It's not working. It seems there's something that I have left out. Let me go back to the code editor and see. Oh, I should have removed this class border here. Remember, this class adds a border around the entire div, and then right now we want to only add the border at the top and at the bottom, so I should have removed that border first. Now back inside my browser, let's see how it looks now. Refresh. Now as you can see, this div now only has a border at the top and at the bottom, and on the side there's absolutely no border at all. And this is how this class allows us to specify the site where we want to have borders. And this is one of the examples of the additive classes. Now there are subtractive classes. Now subtractive classes, we use them to remove borders. So if we have a border around our a div, we can use a subtractive border to, for example, remove a border on a specific side of our div. For example, I'm just going to go back to my div here. I'm going to remove all these borders, the two borders that is at the top and at the bottom, and I'm going to add a border, just a border around the entire div. So let's see how it looks. So we have a border around our div. Now what I want to do, I want to use the subtractive class to remove the border at the top and at the bottom. So as you can see, we have a border around our div, so I only want to remove the border right here at the top and here at the bottom. And there's an example of the class that we can use. As you can see, we will say border, and then we'll specify the side, and then we will say 0, and then the 0 removes the border in that specified site. So let's go ahead and see how this works. So we will say border, and then top, this is the site, and then we'll put in a 0, and then we'll say border, bottom, we want to remove the border at the bottom. Now let's go to our browser and see how it looks. Now let me refresh and see if that removes. Now as you can see, we have managed to remove the borders at the top and the bottom, and we only remain with the borders on the left and the right, and we did that by using the subtractive class. Now I am going to put back the border as it was earlier, so I'm just going to remove these classes, border bottom and border top. I'm going to remove this. So let's go back to the browser. Now our div is back to how it was earlier. What I want to do right now, I just want to add a color to change the border color. I'm going to use one of these utilities. So here's an example. I'm going to use one of these. I'm going to try border primary and see how it looks around this border. So say border primary. Let's see how it looks. So here's how border primary looks on our div. So I think it looks fine. Now I want us to take a look at display utilities. Now let's see what the documentation says about display utilities. As you can see under notation here, the documentation says display utility classes that apply to all breakpoints from extra small to extra large have no breakpoint abbreviation in them, and this is because those classes are applied from minimum width 0 and up, and thus are not bound by media query. So the remaining breakpoints, however, do include include the breakpoint abbreviation. As such, the classes are named using the format. So it will be D for display, and then you'll put in the value for extra small, and then it will be D for display, a breakpoint, and a value for small, medium, large, extra large, and extra extra large. And this is where the value is one of these below here. That will be none, inline, inline block, and so on and so on. And if you look down here, there are examples. As you can see, these elements are sitting next to each other, and this is because they are inline elements. We discussed this in detail in one of our CSS for beginners series in an episode on display. So these elements are sitting next to each other, and this is because they are inline elements. And these ones at the bottom here, they each occupy their own line and are not sitting next to each other. That is, they are taking the entire width of the viewport, and this is because they are block elements. So what I'm going to do right here, I'm just going to copy this example code of these two block elements, and then I'm going to paste it inside my code editor like so. Let me refresh. Now here's how these two elements look inside my browser. Now, using display utility classes, we can hide or show elements depending on viewport sizes, and the documentation goes into much detail to explain this, and these are some of the classes that we will be able to use to achieve that. There is a being able to hide or show these elements using one of or different or a combination of these classes. Now, what I want to do with these elements right here, for example, I want to hide this element on large viewports. So you will be able to view this element. I want us to be able to view this element on all sizes except on large viewports. So we can do that by using one of these classes. I'm going to do that inside my code editor here. So to this element, what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a class that is D for display, and then LG for large, and then I'll say none. So with this is going to make sure that our element is not visible, or we are not able to see it, or it's hidden on large viewports. Now let's go see this inside my browser. Now I'm going to refresh my browser. As you can see, that element has disappeared, so it's hidden on a large viewport. Now you'll see what happens when I squeeze this viewport. You'll see the more I make the viewport smaller, at around this point, the blue or primary element appears, as you can see. So it disappears on large viewports, but on medium to small viewports we are able to have a view of it. Now, as you can see, this black element is visible on all screen sizes. So it is visible on all screen sizes, unlike the blue one, which is only visible on medium to small sizes. Now, what if I want, for example, to hide it on smaller screens? I can do that. To do that, I'll also add a class. Let me add a class inside here. I'll add a class for display, and I'll say none. All right, and then we'll combine these classes. D for display, large, block, like so. Now let's go see how they look inside my browser again. Now you'll see that when I refresh, the black element is still here. It is only that blue element which is not visible on this large viewport. But when I squeeze the screen, you'll see that around this point we are now able to view the blue one, but the black div is gone. So when we move the screen to smaller size, the same is still the case, but when we enlarge the screen, the blue disappears and the black div appears. And this is just one example of the many responsive displays that you can create using these classes. So there's quite a number of these display classes, and you can even combine them to get many different responsive displays. So please play around with them and see what you can achieve with them. And once again, feel free to share what you've managed to create with these classes. Now, moving ahead, I want us to take a look at sizing. Now, if you look at the documentation here, the documentation tells us that the width and height utilities are generated from utility API utilities .scss and includes support for 25, 50, 75, 100 and auto by default. So you can modify these values as you need to generate different utilities. So to put this into practice, I am going to go inside my code editor, and then I'm going to for now, because we are done with what we were I wanted to show you with regards to the displays. I'm just going to delete these two elements. Now I'm going to copy this element and I'm going to paste it 4 times so that we have 5 of them, like so. Now we have 5 of these elements. Let's go see how they look inside my browser. Let me refresh. Now here's how these elements look. I have 5 of them. Now what I want to do here, I want to change their sizes. So I'm going to use one of these classes actually, to give each and every one of these elements a different size. So these are the classes that I'm going to use. So I'm going to change the width. I'm going to use these classes. So inside here, I'm going to specify this is the width. But before I do that, I need to go back. Remember, I have inside my style sheet set the width of my elements to 50%, and this is the reason why they have this size. So this is because I've set their width to 50% inside my style sheet. So I'm just going to comment out this code here, like so. Now let me go back to my index.html file, but maybe before I even do that, let me go back to my browser and see how they look when their width is not specified. Let me refresh. Now here's how these elements look with their width not specified, as I've just commented their specification inside my style sheet. Now I'm going to use these classes, Bootstrap classes, to specify their width. So I'm going to start with the first one. So the first one, I'm going to set this in terms of these sizes: 25, 50, 75, 100 and so on. So inside here, I'm going to start with this one, W for width, and then I'm going to set this at 25, and then this one will be 50, this one will be 75, and this one will be 100, and finally this will be auto. Now let's see how they look. Refresh. Now here's how our elements look with the different sizes that we have specified inside our code editor. This one at 25, 50, 75, 75 and 100, and auto at the bottom here. in terms of sizing, we can also specify the height of elements. You'll see that we'll use the H25 to specify the height, and we can also specify or set the width and height of elements to a maximum width of 100%. Now, finally, I would like us to take a look at the spacing. Now, under spacing, specifically under the section here, notation, the documentation says spacing utilities apply to all breakpoints from extra small to extra large have no breakpoint abbreviation in them. This is because those classes are applied from minimum width 0 and up, and thus are not bound by media query. The remaining breakpoints, however, do include a breakpoint abbreviation. Now, the classes are named using the format. So here is the format. It's property. The property will either be margin, M for margin, P for padding, and then sides. The sides will either be T for top, B for bottom, S for start, E for end, X for left and right, Y for top and bottom, and then blank for a class that sets a margin or padding on all sides of an element. And then the size will be between 0 and 5 or auto. So I'm going to use these classes, use this format to change some styling to our elements, or to create some spaces to our elements. What I want to do, I want to use these classes to give my elements some space, because as you can see, these elements are touching each other. So I want there to be space between these elements. So I'm going to do that inside my code editor. But first, I'm going to remove these sizes that I used earlier. And this is because I think with regards to the sizes, we are done, because the aim here was just to show you that instead of specifying the width of elements inside your style sheet, you can actually use these Bootstrap classes inside your element to specify the width. So I'm just removing them, and then I'm going to go back to my style sheet and uncomment this code in its entirety. So this code is back. So our elements are now back set at 50%. Let's check them out. Let me refresh. Now here's how our elements now look. So I want to create space between these elements so that they do not touch each other. So I'm going to do that inside here. So I'm going to first put in the property M for margin, and then I'm also going to specify the side T for top, and then I'm going to specify the size. Let me give it a put in 3. So I'm going to give them the same margin top. So I'm going to copy this and paste it inside each and every one of these elements here, like so. Okay, let me also paste inside this last one here. Now let's see how they look with a margin top, all of them. Now as you can see, I've managed to create space between all these elements, and now they are no longer touching each other. We can even take things further and create some margin to the left of these elements. As you can see, at the moment these elements are touching the border of our viewport, so we can even give them some margin on the left here. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back inside my code editor, and then inside here I'm going to specify the property that is margin, and then the side start, because we want to change the margin between the left of the element and the border of our screen. So let me also specify the size. So I'm just going to copy this class and paste it inside all our elements like so. Now let's go view this inside my browser. Let me refresh. Now, as you can see, we have now managed to create some space between these elements and the edge of our left screen. And this, we created this space by using these classes right here, the margin start, and specified the size of the margin. What I can also do, I can make this third div or the margin start of this div responsive. Let's say, for example, I want this div to have a bigger margin than the other elements only on large screens, but have the same margin start from medium to small screens. I can achieve that. To do that, I'm going to go into my code editor. Inside here, I will specify the property. So I'll say margin. So this is what I want to change. So the side is start. So this is to the left. Now I'm also going to specify the breakpoint, LG, that is large, and then I'm going to put in the size. Okay, so let's go and see how this looks inside my browser. Let me refresh. Now, as you can see on a large viewport, this div has a larger margin. So the margin of this div is larger than the margins of these other four divs. So let me make this screen smaller. Let's see what happens when we squeeze the screen. Then you'll see at around this point the third div jumps, and now it has a margin start that is the same as the rest of the other elements, but on a large viewport it has a margin start that is quite different or larger than that of the other four elements. Furthermore, the Bootstrap allows us to center elements horizontally by using the MX Auto. So let's just take a look at the example. For example, if we want to center the elements horizontally, this is the class that we will have to use, the MX Auto. Let's put this into practice. Inside here, what I'm going to do, I want to center this element. So I'm going to do this inside here. So remember, this element has a margin start of 3. So I'm going to remove this margin start, and I'm going to use the MX Auto. So let's go view this inside my browser. Let me refresh. Now, as you can see, using the MX Auto, I have managed to center this element. That's it about Bootstrap Utilities. There's still a lot that we have not discussed. I've only discussed the utilities that I think are the most commonly used. For more on Bootstrap Utilities, please check out the documentation at getbootstrap.com. Everything that you need to know about Bootstrap Utilities, you will find it there. Thank you so much for watching. Till we call again next time. Bye.